his name, you know, which he wrote. I recognize that.
Have you ever been to the central office?
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Because that's all from the archives.
As a matter of fact, Bill
the central
posed
office.
me in exactly the same position, signing in, that he did for my father, who visited there.
Yeah, and Jim gave all of his fathers his fraternity pin and everything.
Yeah,
Really?
that's all in the
Exactly, yeah,
founder's
it's all in the
room.
founder's room.
Sure. So one way or another. So what I wanted to do
I
before
wish
you
my
start
granddaughter
rolling
saw some of
is
this.
Oh, yeah.
to fake whatever and just let her get a couple of exposures, and then that's that, and then she'll watch.
Okay.
But I don't want to get a flash on the tape. It isn't right for what you need.
Okay.
So I'll just let her, and then we'll roll.
Well, let Bill get here, and because our executive director is going to be a part of that, and that's probably going to be the.
And this has been on display in our living room.
Before,
But it's up to you. You want it or you don't?
I think it looks nice.
I think it's fine.
All right, then I'll leave it.
Before we begin, I do need the three of you to look at the camera and say, "I consent to being recorded." Mitch Simmons,
I consent to being recorded.
Bill Schilling,
I consent to being recorded.
Mr. Jacobs.
And of course, I have no option, but I will be, I will be recording with pleasure.
Thank you. All right, the film is rolling. You guys remember this is going to be edited, so it's a kind of a Velvet.
Free for all?
Did you know free-flowing discussion? Velvet, did you tell Bill about the format at all? Okay, so
This thing won't really work unless you're between about 5 feet.
you need to get close.
And
So the
you're
three of you
about-
get tight together for one quick picture for Mr. Jacobs.
We can get together like this for that. You got your ears on?
We're good.
There you go.
There's one. Now, you gotta understand a professional
Now take another one.
takes his bride to Niagara Falls, takes 20 rolls and says, I hope I got it. Would
Okay.
you take more than one?
Sure.
You never know. No, press that button with your left. All right. I didn't think it charged itself.
Yeah, I had been
Oh,
charging
you
the
saw
flash.
the red light.
Mhm.
Oh,
You want one more?
No, that's,
Okay.
no, tonight, I mean, tomorrow night, there's gonna be in the dress up. We're
Okay.
gonna be taking more of them. Convince my.
Okay,
Are we on?
The film is
Okay, now
rolling.
I've moved back. Are you still in frame?
You're in frame.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mitch Simmons, and I am the Grand President of Delta Sigma Pi. We are at the Hilton Walt Disney World Resort. It is August the 10th, 2007. We are in Orlando for our 2007 Grand Chapter Congress, 46th Grand Chapter Congress, which is our centennial Grand Chapter Congress. And with us today, I have Bill Schilling, our Executive Director, and Jim Jacobs, son of Harold Valentine Jacobs, is with us. Sorry, you had said something about, who did this video 50 years ago we're talking about?
Homer Brewer, Grand President, Jim Jacobs, Jim Thompson,
Yeah.
the then Executive Director, and Harold Valentine Jacobs on our centennial,
Okay, on our,
50th anniversary.
Rolling.
okay, so.
Gotcha.
I
Take two.
really thought about it. 50 years ago, at the fraternity's 50th anniversary, which I believe was in New York City, is that right?
I believe so.
A similar taping occurred with Harold Valentine Jacobs and
Jim
Jim
Thompson.
Thompson, the executive director, or yes, he was executive director at the time, and
I believe that the taping originally was in the Pocono Mountains Grand Chapter Congress, and in Pennsylvania. And at the time, it was in 1971, because Dad died in 1972. And it was there that the tape, which is here today was a sound tape. It wasn't video, of
Right.
course. And that was so crude that I've not been able to figure it out. So possibly some of the things that appeared or that were recorded on there, which came out of my father's mouth, can be straightened out. And of course, my talking about it won't help because it's only the history of my father we're after. And maybe that will help the future.
Was there a video, there was a recording in 1957 that we're aware of also?
The tape that I'm aware of, it was 1957 at the 50th anniversary with Homer Brewer, Jim Thompson.
And that's one I'm unaware of.
Okay, so there are more recordings available. But, and I guess in commemoration of that, and having Jim here with us today, we thought it would be appropriate on our 100th anniversary celebration, centennial celebration at our Congress, that we would try to repeat the same thing and record some of Jim's memories of his father and some of the stories that Jim told, or Jim was told by his father. What is your earliest memory of your father talking about Delta Sigma Pi?
The earliest memory was some letters when my mother no longer could stay anywhere near us because of a heart problem, and they lived in New York City at that time, and visiting us was getting more difficult. They decided to relocate to Florida, which they did, and during the 10 years or so that they lived in Florida, Dad would mail us some news of what he's been doing. And although we read them, I carefully filed them because it didn't have much meaning at that time. My mother was getting sicker and Dad was blind in one eye for many years before he died. So they had their own problems. And of course, in our marriage, Julia and myself were very busy with trying to keep up with an infant daughter who was gradually growing up with us away from New York City in the country, whereas we are native New Yorkers. It was a difficult transposition, and I was not able to get interested in something that my father was involved in. And then came some magic moments. I didn't plan it. It kind of happened. It was a serendipity to its deepest roots of that word. And that is that when my mother died, Dad wasn't well, and as I said, he was blind in one eye and was having difficulty. So we decided to move him upstate in the village of Monticello, near us. We didn't have any room, no room at the inn, so to speak, because it was a 3-generation home that we were living in. My wife, myself, my daughter, and Julia's mother and father. It was typically a European arrangement, and my in-laws were delighted that we put aside trying to find our own home. They said, we'll add on. So all of this meant that there was no room for Dad when we finally had to move him. At that point, I decided, well, he's not getting too younger, and so I set aside between 5 and 6 every evening after work. I would drop in and chat with him. That we had somebody to cook meals and the rest of it to keep him at least not hungry, but lonesome. So for about a month, I would say, it was father to son, because this was traditional. And there's just so many things that with that age and with my business and with his not very happy situation, I was hard pressed to figure out how to continue. And then it dawned on me one day, father to son isn't working. at least I was uncomfortable with it. And then, just out of a clear blue sky, a thought occurred to me. I cannot tell you what prompted it, but I suddenly remembered that Dad may have some memories that he never told me. So I said the magic question, Dad, what was it like when you were a kid growing up in Brooklyn? That changed my life because of what happened. He's like every other parent, dying to tell his child, in this case, who he was and who he is because of who he was. But no parent is going to volunteer that until the recipient is ready and interested. And of course, I've said that to many of my little speeches to various chapters all over the country. It's an essential thing that most kids forget until it's too late.
I
So
took
in
your
my
advice.
case, I cannot take credit for anything except a way of getting around being boring. And that opened a floodgate. It turned out that he lived in Brooklyn in a lovely house, and he was surrounded by other private houses on President Street in Brooklyn. And it occurred to me that one day, well, what about the neighbors? I mean, this was all preliminary to our main topic, of course, is Delta Sig. But the point here was he began a memory for me and for my wife, which I hope to pass on very quickly to my 12-year-old granddaughter. And that memory was, well, yeah, the neighbors were right next door, and there were two brothers on one side, and the older one and I played stickball in the street because there was very little traffic. But the other kid, I don't know, he was a couple of years younger, but he was always banging on the piano, and I never really got to know him. And I said, well, what was the family name? He forgot. About a week or two went by. I walked in, the same 5 o'clock. He said, oh, James. By the way, the only people who ever called me James were my mother and father. To the rest of the world, I'm Jim.
Right.
He said, either that or my mother would say, James, in that tone, meaning I did something wrong. Like every mother, you can read, if you're a child, you know what's coming.
Right.
But he said to me, James, I just remembered the family name. It was Copeland. And I looked at him, I said, was the first name of that kid who banged on the piano Aaron by any chance? And my father looked at me, he said, how'd you know? You see, my father was tone deaf. The favorite instrument for small orchestras was a mandolin. And he used to joke about it because he couldn't read music. He had a mouth organ. It meant nothing to him, you know, a little bit of a nothing. But he got lonesome, so he joined it, and he proudly said, I'm very good at it. I finish first every time we play something. I mean, this was his outlook on music. But I said, Aaron Copeland, Dad never heard the name. So this was one of the little nuggets I dug from him of his childhood. So time went on, he got older, and then he went to a high school in Brooklyn, and then because he had some interest in fraternities, he met one of the brothers at high school, not the same one, but they both had the same backgrounds, and that paid off because when it came time for Delta Sig, he had some background about fraternities at the high school level and knew what protocols were and secret handshakes and all the things that go with a serious fraternity. So he had a little head start.
Did you, I think we've talked before, you can't find the name of the fraternity? Which one he was in, high school fraternity?
I have the history of all four, and I do know that of course one was born in Italy and the other one was older, so I'm just not sure which one. I may be able to find it, but it doesn't come to mind.
That would be neat. I've tried to find that in researching things and can't find it written
And
anywhere.
I will help you to see if I have
That'd be great.
anything. But he did mention this, that he had a little head start when the idea of a fraternity superseded a couple of other ideas. Some of you may know the history led up to fraternity. It was not the first thought. He met these four only because all four of them decided, and this is now my father's letters to us, and some of the conversation he alluded to was that they all took the same route going home because they were interested in accounting and business, and they decided to do that at New York University's downtown campus. You know, they have one in the Bronx, so they did, and that's where I went to college, up in the Bronx. But the big one is downtown in Washington Square.
Right.
And then my dad used to tell me that going home, they would sometimes walk to the Brooklyn Bridge. Brooklyn Bridge was only built 7 years before my dad was born. So they used to walk down there and then walk across, and then they would go to their various homes in Brooklyn.
So they all lived in Brooklyn?
All four of them lived in Brooklyn, and that began a sort of meeting of the minds, because they didn't like what was going on. And of course, part of the Delta Sig, of which I am so proud that it went in the direction it did, was that there was a fraternity on campus at that time that was exclusive rather than democratic. And they made, and the student council and all the members of the big shots were all fraternity members. They sorted that. And these four men didn't like it. They wanted to be open. So they started out by saying, let's form a club. And that fell flat on his face. Nobody wanted to hear anything about a club. So they decided, as my dad put in his letters, we decided long and not too quietly what would be the next move. Well, somewhere along the line, I don't know whether it was Dad or the other one who went to high school, said, well, what about a fraternity? I think that rang a bell, because right away they had people interested. And one of my father, who had a very quiet sense of humor, he was not a ho-ho fellow, but you had to listen carefully. He said, well, we started this fraternity, but when other people wanted to join, we just told them that we didn't get our charter yet. I mean, this was pure fiction. So, but they worked on it all the spring and summer of 1907. And so they were armed and ready in the fall of 1907. And the rest is history.
Any idea how they picked the date, November 7th?
I asked my father that, and he said, well, it seemed to be a nice date. This is the way they spoke. It was so young and so off the cuff. They didn't know what hit them, because suddenly they realized they had something. Well, they started to think, well, how are we going to keep this thing going? After all, downtown here in Manhattan is not a terribly good place. At one time when they tried a club, they invited people for dinner at their own expense, he adds. And of course that didn't get anywhere. But suddenly there was a couple of bucks. They had to rent a place down there in Washington Square near Greenwich Village, which by the way hasn't changed. And this is now 2007. It's the same as it was then.
Right.
A mecca for New Yorkers who wanted to live their own way. So what happened was that they dreamed up, after they're all Brooklyn men, and they knew all about Coney Island and outings and stuff like that. So they decided, how about some dinners? How about some dances? And so that's what happened. They started to get people interested, not just in the fraternity, but a little more social life. But it was then, and it is today, a very carefully crafted fraternity. And you had to be then, as well as now, a business major of some kind, because they were.
Right.
And they didn't like the ho, ho, ho bit to most fraternities. And I think that's one of the keys to the longevity and success of what is possible today for business majors who, yes, they join for as many reasons as you can possibly imagine, but suddenly they learn about the aims and dreams of the founders, and it is that today. And I think that has encouraged people to join, because it's been true right from the first day.
Any idea how they got the idea to join with the organization in Chicago that became our beta chapter? I forget the name of their fraternity.
Hyksos.
Hyksos, I believe.
Society.
And then I think Gamma at Boston University was a separate fraternity. Do you have any idea how they hatched upon the scheme of joining with them and growing the fraternity?
No. The reason, of course, is that I wasn't really aware of what I had stumbled on, and my main thrust was to go back into my own files, find my dad's talks of 1957 and 1967, which I did yesterday. And it's just so delightful. But I cannot speak beyond what Dad wrote.
Right.
And I had the idea because once he graduated, came World War I, and he spent 17 months in Paris after having married his bride for 4 months. And that was cruel, but this is war. And so when he came back in 1917, when the war was over, he had 2 rewards that were coming up. The second one, in 1923, he earned his CPA degree with the number 1265, which I've been told is quite low. And the second reward is, guess who? 1920. So with that growing responsibility, and my mother, who was a teacher, first year, all her professional life, with the 2 of them being busy, Dad never thought it was important for him to watch the growth.
So you never heard him talk about the fraternity when you were a child at
No.
all? Did you know
No.
that he was a member of it prior to him moving to Monticello?
Had no idea what my father's early life was until I stumbled on it when he was alone with me.
Because I believe we do have some photos of him attending some anniversary events, maybe in the 20s or 30s, that I've seen in the history magazine.
Well, I know he visited the central office in '64, I believe the picture was, and he's the only founder to have done that. How old would he have been? 70s?
Well, I
something
was
like that?
born in 1920, so at that point, I had, my own problems of growing up
Sure.
in the Bronx and so on. So if he talked to my mother about these evenings where he went somewhere or learned something, it wasn't part of my life at all.
I believe in the centennial issue of the magazine, there's a photograph of McKay and Jacobs and Moisello together at an anniversary event of some sort. I don't know if you can grab a copy of it, maybe on the table behind me. And I don't know if you've ever seen that photo, but I believe that's in the magazine.
I believe I went downstairs to see, and there were documents down there I didn't know existed. I saw my father's signature on the paper of 1909.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, the handwriting was absolutely accurate because he was a very careful man when he wrote that. So I guarantee that's his signature. And to see it, I had to move away because I was going to get it wet. It was just so beautiful to see yesterday afternoon. But the answer is I can't help you in an area I had no knowledge until this magic moment when my dad was 1 year away from leaving us, and he started to talk about the fraternity.
Right.
Jacobs, Moiselle, and McKay in a rare shot, right? And of course, there's some bios in here of each one of them. And of course, you heard Mr. Tinkins talking about his father, that he came back to America only
One
once.
time.
And my dad had luncheon with him, and then he went and disappeared and never came back. You want to pass that back?
Was to
Thank you.
Peru or to Bolivia? I don't remember.
By the way, they've left already.
Oh,
The
they did?
Jenkins, yeah, they said goodbye to me about 2 hours ago. They've left the premises.
I didn't know.
So, okay, then I bear their goodbyes for them.
Is that George and Roger, or?
They both went together, yes. They had some reason for going, I think somewhere, didn't they say they had some children with them?
Oh, yes, they did. They definitely did. Maybe that's why.
A number of Roger's
Yeah.
children.
But he's left,
They had
and so
3 of them.
I would love to have him sitting
They
with
checked
us.
out the hotel, or they just, because I understood they were at one of the parks to do.
Well,
Oh.
Mr. Tinkin Senior shook my hand, just before lunch. Anyway, the 3 men, obviously, there's a picture, and the reason for the 4th is he was in South America and only came back for a very short time once. Thought enough to call my dad, and the 2 of them did have lunch a couple of times together, and that was that. So all of this history was way before I knew there was such a thing as Delta Sigma. And so I'm delighted that so much of it has been preserved at the central office under lock and key and in the founder's room. And everything I could find, I gave to you for the founder's room. My dad's key and several other memorabilia. And I hope to see it someday. But again, Oxford is a strange place to get to
Yes, it is.
by air, and I don't care to travel by air, and it's a little long by car.
Yes.
But anyway, how else can I help?
You've been very active with the history sessions that you've done for many years now. What is the greatest thing in your mind that you have gotten from the fraternity?
From a point of view, to be in an event like this, to me, is low on my priorities. The reason is very simple. I'm trying to reach people who are just coming in, who may have joined for reasons that are not important. They have to be business majors, they may have heard about it somehow, they may be lonesome at college, there's 1,000 different reasons. I had in my hand the ability to tell them how this thing got started, or more important, why it got started, and those were 2 of the transcripts I was able to save from my dad's 1956 and 1965, or something close to 10 years apart. Once was the how did it get started, and once was the why did it get started. And I read that 2 chapters, and I've been doing this for 33 years, 2 and 3 times a year by invitation. I don't force myself on anybody. If there's room and they would like me to come. Sometimes my wife and I combine them with some of the things we do. For instance, we ended up several years ago taking a cruise in and out of New Orleans. I managed to talk a chapter down there to invite us, because it didn't mean anything. They came down to the ship on Julia Street, by the way, in New Orleans.
I know Julia Street. I grew up near New Orleans. The
And
Julia Street Wharf.
it worked out that way, but my main thrust was to tell the newcomers what this place really means once you're a brother. And because I get this question about 3 or 4 times a day when I'm at big outfits, well, what would your father think about women? And the question is
In what context?
quite common. And the answer, of course, was quickly answered. There were no women in business. And it was as simple as that. They didn't consider women until 1975, I believe, the first woman,
Thereabouts.
somewhere right in there. Well, that's a long way off from 1907. So this was something that happened that over, my dad and my mother worked together, Dad in his one-man CPA career, my mother teaching all the years, over 35 years of that. So, and my wife Julia's parents worked together. So to us, a common bond of marriage was either separate or together marriages. And we didn't know about women are supposed to stay home. As far as we were concerned, it was quite natural for Dad and Mother not to be at home. And I had a babysitter for myself when I was an infant, I was told. And this was common. And then after my mother recovered from birth, she said, I can't take this. All the women in the park talk about is their kids and their delivery pains and stuff like that. She says, I'm a teacher. She was in 1917, before my father and mother got married.
Did she continue teaching after you were born?
Absolutely. She, until she got sick and had to retire after 35 years of teaching, that's when they moved down to Florida. But I didn't know anything about women and home, so it was natural.
Where did they live during all this time? In Brooklyn still, or when your dad was, mother and father were young professionals, where were they living all those years?
That was under control of where my mother taught. And she began teaching down in Spring and Lafayette Street.
Oh, in Manhattan?
In Manhattan.
In New York.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
in Manhattan. And that very quick, I don't know exactly where they lived during that 1 or 2 years, but it became untenable for my mother. Her German background didn't go with the Italian immigrants. As a matter of fact, if I may, the trigger came when one day, of course, down in Spring and Lafayette Street, it was a modern school, it had steam heat. Well, the Italians didn't know what steam, especially the first generation. So one day during the late fall, when it got chilly, my mother said to somebody, it doesn't smell good in here. I can't understand it. And somebody said, I think it's the Italian kids. So my mother found a mother of one of her youngsters and complained about it. It turns out that in Italy, they sew the kids into their underwear when the fall and winter come. It can get very cold in Italy. I can tell you, I was in the Italian campaign during World War II. It's chilly. And they don't get out of their underwear until it gets warmer. And that's what my mother, with her German background, smelled. She complained to this mother, and to this day I will never forget the answer. I send my child to school. You should teach him, not smell him. So my mother said, this is not for me. And she got a job teaching in the Fordham section of the Bronx. And that's when they moved to the Bronx, and that's where I was brought up.
Did, during these years, I know that Tinkin was away, but do you know if the other three went out socially or interacted in any way?
Dad
Just as
never
friends?
referred to the other two brothers who were still in New York. They may have predeceased him. I don't know. This would be in your records. But the answer is, I know nothing about the other brothers, except what he put down, and I've been able to dig a little bit.
What types of things have you learned about your father through your affiliation with Delta Sig that you weren't able to find out in your time with him?
The fact that these four men believed in something that America stands for almost alone today, and that is true democracy. He was so proud of the fact that in 1907, one Catholic, two Protestants, and one man who was Jewish, my father, were able to get together and agree that there was no place for being a bigot, being selective. It just wasn't in their blood. They had the same goals, and that's what kept them together, and that's the tradition that it is today. And that's what I learned about my father. There was no feeling of somebody being of different religion. We were brought up in the Bronx, and there were divisions where the Jews were here and the Italians were here and so on, but it wasn't table talk. As far as I know, they were just delighted to be free, to make their own choices. My mother had no prejudice as a teacher. Nobody asked her religion. Yes, the Jewish kids would take the Jewish holidays, and suddenly my mother had to make a decision. And many times, as I was growing up, Jewish of course, I would say, why should it, because I was a member of the Reform sect. There was nothing orthodox about my background. And I would say, why should I go to school today? Yes, I'm Jewish, but there's going to be almost nobody there, because the Jewish kids are staying home. It didn't matter to them. And this is what the ambience I grew up with, democracy, and it didn't matter. There were things going around us, but it didn't concern us. And that's a tradition that is so strong in my memory. We lived that where we are today. When we moved upstate, Julia and I were asked immediately to join temples and stuff. We're not joiners. Just as a side issue, our religion, and we've said this many times, is the arts. Without the arts, we have no civilization as we know it. And we have lived that credo by fostering arts. My wife became a founder of an arts council. She was cited by that for her actions in getting money out of Albany to keep going, and to this day we have medals all over the place of the stuff that her citations brought her. So we have a different point of view, and that's one of the reasons why we're not brothers in the truest sense. We're arts majors, so we're honorary members. I must make that clear. We basically came in because of the power of the feeling of democracy that we are able to push along where possibly it may have gotten lost. And that I am so proud to be able to have done serendipity is the only word I can think of. Is there any? I feel at a loss of giving you some information of anything more than something I uncovered by accident. It doesn't go all the way, and I wish it could. I've been trying, and every once in a while, Bill Schilling will say, well, let's take a good hard look and see what we can dig up. And he has done that. As a matter of fact, the one that everybody has spotted is my dad's picture with the bow tie. And he was able to find out by just being uncomfortable with it that there had to be a reason, that my dad said, I don't know where that bow tie came from. I never wore one. I never wanted one. I always wore the traditional tie as I'm wearing today. And so Bill helped me track that down to the fact that when it became picture time for the yearbook of 1909, somehow he forgot to put a tie on. So the photographer on immediately said, here, put this on. It was the first and last time he ever wore a bow tie. And that's history. I can't help it.
Is there another yearbook we can go to and get a picture with a regular tie, perhaps? That would be a more accurate image of your father?
Well, when I walked in Wednesday night to see where all the rooms were, I walked into the International Ballroom, and there, up there are the 3 pictures, you know, more than life-size, and there's my dad with that bow tie.
It's the
And
only picture we know of him, you know, that's the picture we all
That's
remember.
why I want to make it clear, it was not his view. It was an accident. And to this day, that's the only explanation I've ever been able to find.
I would love to find a photo like that with a different tie on to see how it would compare, to see if people would recognize it, because everybody
my
knows
point.
he's the guy with the bow tie.
And on every publication that has the 4 founders, that bow tie is always there. So I think you better not touch it. It's history, and let the answer be told if it ever comes up.
Even
It's
in this
so
picture, he's a
irrelevant.
regular tie.
It's totally irrelevant.
You might
It's the
know-
man behind the tie.
You might know something about this, that being an NYU alum, I believe.
Yes.
They were talking today about that the colors started off possibly as different colors, and violet was one of the early choices.
Yes.
And I believe the yearbook for NYU is called Violet or something. Their colors are,
Their school colors are violet
Yes.
and white.
so that,
Violet and white, yes.
okay, so they
Yes.
probably talked about, well, let's make it the school colors, and then they talked about.
Well, you gotta, the school colors of New York University have no connection whatsoever with the colors of Delta Sig, because those, the bywords, the passwords, the handshake came in 1907 and 19, you know, in the formative years, and because 2 of the 4 brothers had some idea from the high school days, they picked these colors. They weren't in college yet, and they knew what to do. As a matter of fact, my dad, and this is a matter of record, said they had to choose a name, and it was customary in those days to figure out something in Greek. So what they did was to dream up the views of this new fraternity, and then have a friend of one of the brothers translate it into Delta, Sigma, and Pi. So that's what the growth. The color was as irrelevant in those days as, let's say, November the 7th.
Right.
It was a choice, oh, let's do it, and that has remained. It makes no difference to what it stands for today. It's just pure accident. Some of these things happen, and there are no answers, and those are 2 among them. No, the colors have no relation to the violet. I know, because I used to have to sing it
I think in some of the old minutes, there are records of someone moved that the colors be violet and yellow or violet and white, and they voted no, and then they changed it to another color, and they finally got to the old golden royal purple. So that would be interesting to know.
Puzzling, yeah.
Well, there's so many things in life that happen that way. The story, when I was in service, we ended up right after peace was declared in the European Theater of Operations, and I had a chance to go to the opera in somewhere in Italy. And I remember that during the opera, there was a tenor in the part who came down stage and then at some point walked backstage and then walked downstage, and they said, "Why did you do that?" Well, one of the great singers always did it that way. So he was still alive, and they said, "Well, you know, why did this happen?" And he thought for a moment, and in English, of course, translation, he said, "Oh, well, one of the performances, I had to go backstage to spit." And that's, so the answer is, and when I was in training as an officer, I became what is called a warrant officer, and we had to take a special course in the traditions of the U.S. Army. And the man who was talking about traditions, and the flag goes up, and you salute this, you do that, and somebody said, "Why?" And the answer was, "Because." That's all, just because. So when you ask questions about the date, just because. There is no answer.
In that tape from '57, they asked Harold about the badge, the skull, and he says something to the effect of, "That was Marcello. He was into all that stuff, and we didn't care. He had dragons and bats, and I don't remember exactly, but apparently he was the one that was all excited about that. And like you're saying, the others didn't really care, but he kept bringing things, and finally they just said, fine."
Well, again, with 4 people getting together, there are 4 different personalities from 4 different backgrounds. There had to be somebody who sort of magnetically said, "Well, let's," and then let them winnow it out. Well, does that make sense? So there was really one leader, and I think you put on it, CPAs are not known to be leaders or anything. They follow a very narrow path of, well, this is what I do. So you won't find any CPAs running for public office. At least I don't think so.
Not very often.
Lawyers, yes, but CPAs,
Yeah,
no.
it's all about control with the lawyers, I believe. They want to control everybody and everything.
I think the 4 of them were able to think along certain lines because they respected each other. And they let one man make some major suggestions. I don't know how else it could have happened. Somebody has to lead, the rest of us are followers, and we weigh it. We don't have to say yes. And what about? And yesterday, he was saying about his father that he was a very quiet man who never made any objections. But if he thought of something wrong, he would say, "Well, now, what about? Let's see," and so on. So he was deeply concerned with the outcome, but he wouldn't make a fuss. And I think the 3 others, they were all in tune with somebody who said, "Let's think about that." And one leader who said, "Well, what's wrong with it, you know?" But it worked out. It happens so infrequently. It's almost like marriage. It's the fact that 2 people who meet and they think that this is the basis for marriage, but marriage is not a chance in life. And I'm very proud to say that I didn't gamble but once in this life. I won, and it's been 60+ years. And we have been managing each other because, as I've said many times to the Delta Sig people, the first 6 months is heaven. And then all of a sudden, you realize it's a business. And marriage must be treated the same way as any business. And that who does what, when. And that you have to decide between the two of you. Otherwise, you don't have a marriage. Let us not, to the marriage of true minds, admit impediments. Mr. Shakespeare said that. I didn't. I just love it.
Sounds like good legal advice, too.
Stop looking at the camera and mentioning lawyers, please.
Those are asides. It's a Shakespearean thing, too.
You're taking that out of context. Read the whole
One
paragraph.
story that I've heard you tell about your father was...
Start over, Mitch. I interrupted you.
Okay. One story I've heard you tell about your father was a visit I believe he made to the Alpha chapter. They invited him to come talk to them. And he found out that they had begun excluding people.
Yes.
When did that happen, and how did that occur, do you know?
Okay, very simply, he was in the subway during World War II in about 1943, 44. I asked him, and that's the best he could come up with, but he happened to notice a great big handsome guy with a Delta Sigma Pi in the same subway car, so he couldn't resist. He went in, introduced himself and so on, and at that point they didn't know there was a Harold Jacobs still alive in 1944, 43. So it immediately got him an invitation to a meeting. Come on down to the fraternity. So my dad told me during one of these little talks that he told my mother, well, he'd be back about 10:30. After all, he said, what have I got to talk about to these people? They don't know me really. I got to talk about how it started. So he was expected home about 10:30. Okay. So we got up when it was his turn, and he said a few remarks. Then he said, you've got to remember, you people of Delta Sig, that this fraternity was founded on really democratic principles. After all, it was one Catholic, 2 Protestants, and 1 Jew. And he said this was unheard of in those days. And that's why the fraternity was so democratic, and it began to attract people because of its principles. And there was a dead silence. And my dad thought to himself, what did I say wrong? A brother stood up, he said, Mr. Jacobs, I don't know how we're going to have to tell you this, but we've got to tell you. The bylaws have been changed to white Christian only. Well, my dad was absolutely stunned. And among the brothers, there began a brouhaha, and it went on till 2 in the morning. We've got that something's wrong. That's not what we thought it would be. We didn't realize that we were being selected because we were Christians.
Was it
And
just
so-
Christians, or did they exclude Catholics too?
Pardon me?
Was it just Christian? They would take Catholics or Protestants?
It didn't say Catholic. I have the little book of bylaws and everything of 1920. And by that time, it had changed. I have that home. It looks like a little
So
bitty
that soon, it
thing.
changed after it was founded?
So, and this is now 20 years later.
Right.
But Georgetown University got hold of this idea. You may know in Washington, Georgetown is Catholic oriented, but they are more than that. And they get credit for starting the return. And to their credit, they are top of the list of the universities which suggested in very strong terms that we rethink the bylaws. And that has brought us to today. That's unthinkable with the amazing variety we have of people whose backgrounds are totally alien to the American colonists. We are now one world in America, and you name it, there's one or more in Delta Sigma of everything. So we have a real hash here, and it's been made to work because this is America.
Yeah, our fraternity today is very much a melting pot. As was evidenced by Eddie Stevens trying to pronounce names at the awards luncheon today with the scholarship winners.
Yes.
There were names of people from other continents,
Absolutely.
other languages, so that was actually entertaining how he pronounced some of this.
Some of these stories, I get to dreaming every once in a while about how close I came to ignoring the whole thing. And again, it was those things that happen. What is it they say? Life happens when you're planning something else. I had no idea I was going to hit this pot of memories when I went to visit a sick man. But he was waiting to be asked, as every parent is. But they won't do it unless they know there's somebody listening.
And I guess that's the piece of advice that you repeat, and that's what you would pass on to our brothers, more so than anything fraternal, is to ask your parents to tell their story.
I always close with the same letter that he wrote to me because it embodies his dream. And that is that when he, did I go over this in Boca Raton while we were sitting here? I don't remember because.
I don't think so.
Okay, in Boca Raton, the chapter down there got wind of the fact it was only a 2 years old when they learned that Harold Jacobs from Delta Sig was in the neighborhood. So they invited him to help with the installation of some new brothers. And in the letter, which has been circulated, and I have read as a eulogy when he died, and I have read it at every single chance I get. The last sentence says it all, because in the message he said, down in the deep south, in Boca Raton, south of which there is none, we inducted the first Negro into the fraternity. And then he said his last sentence, if my life means anything in this small world, that's it. He saw a dream come true. So this is why I desperately want to reach the newcomers, because they have no way of knowing the depth of love and of cooperation and of the principles behind this organization. It's so rare.
I'm going to need to change.
A tape, which we played with neighbors and friends and so on, of one of the talks. There's one story you don't know, and that is that where was it? You know,
Yes.
this is marriage. She knows what I'm going to say before she says it.
It was in down south, and I can't think of.
Yeah.
It was in the city.
It was one of the meetings where I
It
was
was
invited.
after he drove us, in fact, we met him the other night. The man who drove us from Tampa to Jacksonville.
It was Jackson.
Jacksonville,
I was
yes.
there.
Huh?
Was that?
I don't know whether-
When I drove you to the airport.
Somewhere in there were only 7 young women sitting
Was
there.
A little bit more than
We
7.
walked in 9, but my point is, that was the first attempt. And they got so excited. There was one gal with a little tripod, and she started the camera, it was a tape. She started it rolling. I started talking, and I didn't have the heart to tell her. She did not fasten the tripod tight enough. and gradually the camera itself just sort of went to a 45-degree angle. Have you that tape where I'm standing on my head? It was, yeah, this was hilarious. But eventually, you were there once with a cameraman and a camera. And that time it stood up.
Yeah.
I remember that.
We have a good tape of it.
But these are the things that happen you can't figure out. She got so excited, she didn't know what was
They
happening.
had exams that week, that's why there were so few people in the audience.
Yeah.
So-
She apologized, but I've told this many a time, I don't care how many. It's the quality. It's the people who are new, who really don't understand us, what's it all about. And I try to dig. Last night, do you want to tell that one?
Which one?
Well, which
You went
one?
the young man and stuff?
Yes, this
Oh,
is
yeah, there
priceless.
was a young man who stopped us, he says, I have to tell you, he says, my friend and I were real bravado kind of people. Nobody can tell us anything. We're, we know it all. And this, what's this fraternity bit? Who cares about the fraternity? But we'll go. So they went, and then.
This was
well,
Providence.
Yeah, I guess so, but he wanted to tell Jim, he said, I heard your speech today. And he said, my friend and I, who are so bravado and we know it all, and he didn't even want to go hear the speech because nobody could. He says, my friend always criticizes everybody, including big names on television. And he said, but I was lost in your speech today. And he said, I was never so moved by anything in my life. And he began to tell us about his background. Evidently, he came from I guess, Polish background in Pennsylvania, and he worked hard all his life. And he said, but I never expected, and he went on and on. I thought, my God. I don't know what else. to say.
How did it end?
Oh, he ended up giving Jim a big hug and a kiss.
That's great.
You know, well, this, of course, is one of these things. We were walking around, headed for, we were hungry and we picked up something because you eat at odd times, whatever. And we were on our way to bed when he stopped us dead. But this is the payoff.
And he kept going on, and I'm coming to see you in Monticello, and I'm gonna bring some of my friends, they gotta meet you. I've
Yeah.
never met a couple like you before.
Yeah.
He went on and on and on.
There was one parallel to that you don't know too. Maybe I told you, I don't know. Because every so often I would give them a little sermon about, talk to your parents, or if you're still around, talk to your grandparents and so on. I urge them because they're not going to ask, you've heard that before. And I've gotten mail, and one in particular wrote to me, a Delta Sig girl, who said, you won't believe this, Mr. Jacobs, but I told my father that I'm going to talk to him about some of his early days and where he grew up. And he said, my father was a Delta Sig and he never told me.
Oh, my.
So she
That was
said,
all the
I
result
have
of
you
his
to
speech."
thank for it. And this is the payoff. You never know
You
what's
never
going to
know
happen.
until you ask.
Yeah.
My mother's in a sorority, and she got the magazine her whole life. And then I got this job, or involved in the Greek world, went to my fraternity and all this. And I met the executive director of that sorority and said, I don't think my mom ever got the magazine. And she looked it up, and I asked my mom later, she said, yeah, I get it, I've got it my whole life. But it's an example, that came in the mail for whatever, 16, 18 years growing up. I never paid any attention to it whatsoever.
Incidentally, they're one of the Delta Sig magazines, and it has to be about 12 years ago, 11 and a half maybe. there's a picture of Jim and my granddaughter, who was about 6 months old, on, I don't know if you remember this, on the editorial page. And the reason was that when we went to Oxford, they gave me a bib with Delta Sigma Pi written on it. And there's a picture of my granddaughter and Jim on that editorial page. So it was, and somebody asked me yesterday, do you tell your own children about this? I said, well, my granddaughter knows Delta Sigma Pi before she could even read letters. She could pick out Delta Sigma Pi. It's a very smart kid, she knows Greek.
Well,
So they know.
These are little snippets, and you tend to forget them
I don't know
until
what year
something
they-
comes along like the last couple of days, and then the memories begin. And Judy and I are blessed far more than other people our age. I gotta be honest and say that it isn't a happy world with some people who are even younger. Her mother is an example. We had to put her in a nursing home, and we came in one day and she said, this is a terrible hotel, I don't like the meals. So things were going wrong, and we're still able to do what we just did here today. I don't know if it's gonna keep up. I ran into a roadblock yesterday during my speech. I forgot the name of the pianist. And this was very awkward because I've done it so many times, is to remember.
And we know the music, you could probably sing the music.
Well, I'm fond of, his music, and I can't live without classic music. They cut us off from New York City. That is my TV station. You may know that radio is in the middle of the TV band, and they stopped it. So we no longer get New York City classical WQXR, but I tuned in on Philadelphia, Temple University, and they have repeaters all over the place. So I tuned in on a place called Pocono Mountain, and they have a tower there. I picked that up. So I'm listening to Aaron Copland and all the wonderful composers, and the hell with New York. But I can't live with that. And that's, again, Judas in my life. Art is all. Everything else is immaterial. Art has made us a civilization, whether it's sculpture or art or dance. This young lady in high school was on the stage of the old Met as a ballet dancer in high school. And she never knew how Aida came out because her mother took her home to do her homework. And it wasn't until after we were married, we went to see the whole thing. And I don't know whether the name Milton Cross rings a bell. Milton Cross was the narrator. Does anybody
Well,
remember
you'd have
that
to be
day?
a New Yorker, I
For-
think. Well, they always broadcast the Metropolitan Opera on Saturdays for years. I think when I was a little girl, he was the announcer for it. And he did other programs, but he was known for that. And had a magnificent speaking voice. And he would tell the story of the opera and so forth. And what were you going to tell about?
But you met somebody who got you.
Oh, I used to see the ballet every single night of the week in Milton Cross's old booth
Yeah.
at the Met. And that was when Leonard Bernstein was coming up, and he was, boy, that poor man was tackled by more women, or tried to. He was very handsome, and he was young, and he took over the baton in an emergency, actually. Well,
Yeah.
he wrote all those big Broadway shows, Candide and everything. And but I used to see the ballet every single night of the week, almost.
Well, I also
I
have,
didn't pay for it either.
one of the greatest ballet people of my generation, and maybe even his tradition of creating ballets, is a man by the name of Jerome Robbins. I went to camp, children's camp, with Jerry Rabinowitz. Now, I didn't think anything of it. We knew Jerry, and we lost track of each other.
They were bunkmates, and they did Gilbert and Sullivan together.
Yeah, so we knew each other. So ballet, and when we were doing camp shows, we do Gilbert and Sullivan. And he always took what we call top banana, all the humorous things, and I was always the second fiddle. But we worked together, and when he died, he had pages worth of background. But I got a call from somebody who wanted to write a book, because I had pictures of him when we were in camp, and he dug that up. So I'm in a couple of books merely as helping people realize that the arts are part of our life, and I'm able to do it. And now there's a guy doing another book on it, and we've been in touch as well. So my name is in the books as somebody who knew Jerry Robbins. So arts are part of our life. We can't disown it. It is.
You mentioned before that that you had medallions or mementos, whatever, at home about related to the arts and things, but I don't think we've explained the medallion that you're wearing for the record here.
You're talking about?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
Oh, we were given those at one of the, I don't remember where it was. We were the first ones to get this.
Well,
I was part of the presentation group. I don't recall exactly where it was either. It was one of the
Does it say on there where
events.
they were given? Does it
well,
say?
the one that sticks in my mind was the silver helmet. And I'm not sure whether I was impressed enough with this as a meeting, because it hangs in our living room. I mean, we didn't put it in a drawer, and obviously we wear it with pride. But I treasure the moments. What was his name? Who was the
Randy?
Randy was the man who presented it to us.
Randy Holtz.
Yeah.
The grand president
And
at the time.
the earning, because my father's gold helmet is in the founder's room. But for me to get something for 25 years, I wasn't asking for recognition. I was asking for the chance to tell something about what kind of an outfit this was. So I don't honestly say, the only comment I ever had, and it went up for discussion, I don't know whether you were in on it at all, Bill was the fact that there were 3 Christians, so to speak, and 1 Jew, and there are 4 stars on here. And I made the suggestion, possibly the Grand Council or whoever decides things might want to consider one of those stars as the Star of David, because the other stars are a symbol of Christianity. And they discussed it, and the answer was it wasn't that important. I don't mind that. That was my decision.
But I had heard that the original ring had the Star of David in it.
I don't know that. I don't believe that's true. What they discussed it, and they looked at some of the old things we
Yeah.
have, and I guess the point was, if Harold brought that up when they were founding it, he must have got voted down back then.
Well-
Because it hasn't
Well,
been.
he wasn't, religious in that sense. Neither
Yeah.
was his mother or his rest of his family.
No.
And they were about 5 generations back American, and they, it was a different kind of thing. Now, we live now in an area, which I'm learning things about. We had a lot of hotels. We had 400. They're gone. Whatever bungalows for summer are are still there, but have been bought up by the Hasidic community.
This is the
Hasidic Jews.
Poconos.
No,
No.
Catskills.
This is
Catskills, that's
back-
right, we talked
Catskills.
about this.
Yeah,
That's right.
this is, we live 10 miles from the old Woodstock Festival. That's where we
Good.
live. And they are a world unto themselves. I mean, they dress like, almost like the Amish, you know, the same kind of thing. And so I am learning there, even in among Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, they're different background. I remember working one year for Ledley Laboratories, the pharmaceutical, in the advertising department, and somebody came in from Ireland, who, of course, most of them are staunch Catholic. And I was reading a book at the desk, because I had nothing better to do. I was a receptionist and wasn't that busy. And she said, "You're reading that book?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, they're not allowed to read that." Now, Catholics in America were allowed to read it, but they weren't allowed to read it in Ireland. You know, there's such variations. And I think Harold, in that sense, was a variation of, yes, in name, they were Jewish. That was the extent of it. They didn't observe any rituals or anything like that.
What might be related, one of the Jewish fraternities was founded at NYU about the same time that we were founded. And I wonder if he had any interest in that group or came along, you know, that entered my mind. And also I wondered about, well, were there Catholic fraternities? And
Sure
I
there
don't,
are.
there probably are, there aren't any more. I mean, there may be historically Catholic fraternities.
I thought they weren't allowed to have fraternities, Catholics,
Well,
but I'm not sure about that.
And
there's
do
an
now.
area here in our lives. When I moved upstate, it was because I was offered a partnership in an advertising agency and printing plant. Up till that time, I was a commercial photographer with press passes to the United Nations. I covered Doug Hammarskjöld. Does that name ring a bell?
Sure.
He was the third
Secretary
Inspector General or whatever it was, a big shot. He was about 6'7", and when he walked across, you could see him a mile away with a, you know, lots of following and so on. Unfortunately, he died in a plane crash. I enjoyed working at there, but as far as I was concerned, there was no such thing as religion. Yes, I was bar mitzvahed
His
merely
father
because
was
of
not
my
bar
mother's
mitzvahed,
family.
incidentally.
Pardon me?
Jimmy's father was not bar mitzvahed.
No.
And Jimmy was bar mitzvahed only because his mother was a very social animal. I hate to say this.
Well, it's
And
a-
she wanted a party for the girls.
yeah, she came from a
I'm
big
very
family.
honest about
And you
it.
said your father was a fifth generation American?
I was told that my great-great-grandmother waved to the boys in blue in 1861 as they marched off in the Union Army from the city of Brooklyn.
It wasn't part of New York.
Yep.
Right. Do you know when your family came to the U.S. and when, and from where?
No, not really. We
I
can-
think I heard that there was, well, James, of course, is very English, so a lot of them did come from England, and that's why the name James.
Hmm.
And there was some people from Poland, but that's about all I remember hearing about.
No, I know a lot about Judith's family because we have a postcard from the ship that her mother used from Russia by way of Rotterdam to America. And she, at 1912, something like that, I had that postcard
When
at
she
home.
came here, she
And
was
it's
very-
stamped
very
Halifax because it went that way and so on. And I know most of her family and some of the way back, a couple of generations. But again, the arts rears its head. You want to tell them?
I don't know which story.
Okay, the fact
Oh, we're
that-
keeping you from going on to your next whatever?
I do have a meeting I need to get to.
I mean, this is,
regarding-
No, I didn't, all right, this is
but
digression,
it's
it
fine.
really is.
No, it's interesting to me because I don't know that much about when my family came
well,
here.
his.
But I do know when my great-grandmother came here from Lebanon, because we have the records of her coming here. My great-grandfather went to get her and bring her back through Ellis Island.
Oh,
The boat
Yes.
she came on, he had already been here and was already an American citizen, but was from Lebanon and was engaged to her. So, and I just found it interesting that it was fifth generation.
What's
both
interesting
years
about
ago.
Harold, I keep saying Harold so you know who I'm talking about.
Right.
Versus Jimmy.
Yeah,
Harold's father, his grandfather, ran all the concessions in Central Park, the goat carriages, the carousel, and the very famous posh carriage trade restaurant called the Casino in the park. It was so well known that I remember when I first came to Monticello, I started subbing in the schools because I didn't know what else to do. And I do have a New York State teaching certificate, so I was able to. And I was reading an O. Henry story in the class, an English class. It mentions the casino in the park. So they come from a very New York, Brooklyn background with all of that history. And when he had to, when it was taken over by the city, the park, he had to get rid of all of his animals that were the, these, what they have pony rides now, that was donkey rides then. He found some property at 70th Street at Broadway because New York stopped about 59th Street. It was gradually moving up and people were buying property in that area. And he bought a big piece of property. This is Harold's father, and built 3 brownstones, one of which we lived in for a short time when we were first married, because they were rented out. He didn't run.
What was Harold's father's name? What
James.
was Harold's father's name?
James,
James.
Your name?
yeah, James Jacobs.
But it's a very interesting history in New York. I wish that I had his grandmother became very senile as she got older, and she sold her house in Brooklyn for $5,000 because that was a number she remembered from when they first built the house. I mean, she was not right anymore. She was giving things away that were really precious. And she did have a picture of a policeman from Central Park. They wore the hats like the bobbies wear in England. And I wish I had that today, but it was unfortunate. She gave all that stuff to strangers.
Speaking of parents, I don't think we talked about Rose and the name. I know there's some, I don't want to say controversy, but I believe that the song, The Rose of Delta Sig, was written and then later, because her name was Rose, they dedicated it to her. That is my understanding. Can you?
She had some connection with it, yes. I don't know, as far as I know.
Rose being your mother's name.
Well, again, some things fall into place and just can't be verified. And maybe it's partly wishful thinking, partly an assumption. I can't verify it at all. It just fell into place, and at this point, I don't know whether it helps to find out anything more. The composer certainly is no longer around, so I can't help you. But it seems to be fitting somehow.
Oh, very much.
And of course, we make a joke, when you're not around, we make a joke about the music. Nobody can really sing it.
I wasn't.
They really should print up, because I don't remember the words. And they should print up little in the program that you have for banquet or at the end. But they do this for the Star Spangled Banner even in certain instances, really.
Yeah.
and put it into a program.
I've seen
Baseball
it.
games, they put it up on the big jumbotron.
Yeah.
Or put it up on a,
It's a tradition, and we do it because. That's all.
It is a terrible tune.
Yes, yeah. There's no question.
Most of the college students learn it to the tune of,
Yeah.
I've been working on the railroad, the Yellow Rose of Texas.
Yeah.
There's some other tunes that they learn it to, and when we come to things like Grand Chapter Congress,
they don't know.
they're appalled at the song we're singing
Yeah.
because they've never heard it sung by the original music that it was
Yeah.
written
I think it's pretty.
to.
Well, how many people really can sing the Star Spangled Banner? I mean, there are notes in there that are way up there.
It's a bad piece of music too.
Tomorrow night at our banquet,
Oh, it always ends up with this.
no, the Disney vocalist is going to sing all verses of the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, my.
And
We have to stand there, I
and
guess.
many people will not be aware there are more
I
than
didn't know that.
one verse to the Star Spangled
They're
Banner.
4 or 5, are they not?
Well, sometimes they transpose those high notes
Yeah.
for.
Oh, you're talking about stanzas.
Yeah, I know these.
Yeah, and what was it, an English drinking song, I believe?
Mhm.
Well,
To an
we
actual-
inherited a lot of things from you, God save the Queen and stuff like that.
Mhm.
God bless America. Well,
Sing too.
music is something we usually listen to. You gotta have some talent to get away with it. And,
And my wife is a musician.
Bobby?
My wife is a musician. She plays the flute.
Oh, how nice.
In fact, the choir director at our church,
Yeah,
I wanted her to record the Rose of Delta Sigma Pi.
yeah, with a.
And she has a music degree, and she said, some of this is not musically accurate. Some of the chords.
Yeah, a business student wrote a piece of music.
Yeah.
Well, we probably need to bring this to a
Yes.
close.
Yes.
but I so appreciate
Let
your
that-
time with just to have this talk.
Well,
It's been a lot of
we got a
fun.
boatload of stories. You could be here for weeks because
Well,
what with, for 23 years, that I booked the professional talent for our festival. And I've got stories about every entertainer that you could imagine. They either slept in our house or ate in our house.
whole dance companies had lunch on the front lawn.
Well, we appreciate your being here for so many years. You guys have been, I think, a
been
vital
wonderful.
part of the history of the fraternity to be able to regale us with the stories of your father and to share the message you have. And I've heard it many times, and I don't get tired of listening to it. And as you said, a lot of the things we don't know the historical accuracy, because you've even told me you talked to some of the older gentlemen who disputed a fact here or there. And,
Yeah.
and it's like, well,
Yeah.
the fact is, that's their recollection, just like it was your father's recollection.
You know, and
But-
this
No,
is-
but Velvet, I mentioned that to Velvet,
Mhm.
and she had a funny look on her face. She says, well, yeah,
Well,
we know.
this kid last night, he kept saying, why do you want to associate yourself with young college kids for? And I was a little flawed at that because I've had 2 careers. One, of course, was theater, but the other, I've been in education.
Mhm.
So I know the other end of it. And to me, it's thrilling, from an educational standpoint, to see what happens to these kids.
Mhm.
And many times, if I can, I throw my 2 cents in and advice, like the MBA degree that I mentioned, because I know that things like that are needed. And they said, oh, never thought of that, I came across a couple of kids who were interested in the arts, but they were business majors. I said, so combine them, whatever.
Well,
Anyway.
thank you guys for your participation, your being at our conventions and visiting chapters. And
Whatever.
And hopefully that will be able to continue as long as you guys, yes, I've heard that.
No, that is such a sad
I've
thing
heard
because,
that.
no, and I said that would be the last, this is the last, I promise, God's honor. Something my dad said to me, and he knew
Can't get up
his
now.
time was very short. And one night, when I was talking about my future and Julie's future, he says, James, if you listen to your father for the second time, the first time was before the World War, and he said, you'll take typing and shorthand, never mind your BA degree. But that's not what my point. My dad looked at me, he said, when you get older, please, wear out, don't rust out. And I'm trying very hard to follow that. I will keep going as long as I get an okay, an invitation. You know, I just looked at next spring's
Conference.
the chapters and where they are, and there's one in Buffalo.
Yep.
And I have driven to Buffalo, but I don't want to go without finding who's in charge and is there room. I mean, who needs this if you got it all planned out? That's all.
I'll be sure to tell him to seek you out.
I don't think they're going to appreciate
And
that.
I'm sure that he would appreciate
As
you.
long as
Well-
it's not in the middle of winter in Buffalo.
Yeah. No, this is spring. And it's a long way off for people in our age bracket, but if we're still vertical, we'll somehow.
Rather be
Listen,
vertical than horizontal.
my Honda is now 14 years old and is still going.
Yeah.
So, a little TLC goes a long way.
Well, thank you so
boy.
much.
This couch is too low.
Well, whoops,
I'll give
you know.
No.
That's a deep couch, I agree.
Well, with my bad back,
Thank you,
that's my
sir.
problem.
You know